It came every morning at 7:22. Same shoes, same corner, same man who never looked down. Kofi had been counting the days since October, not in a notebook, because he had no notebook, but in the way children who have learned early that nothing is guaranteed count things, carefully in the back of the mind, the way you press a coin into a closed fist before you spend it. By the morning of March 14th, a Tuesday with a dry harmattan wind blowing red dust off Nkrumah Avenue and into everything, the count had reached 97. 97 mornings. 97 times the same black Oxford shoes had stopped at his wooden crate on the pavement outside Barclays Bank on High Street in central Accra. 97 times the man had placed one foot on the crate, then the other, and stood looking at his phone while Kofi worked. 97 times the man had dropped a folded note on the crate without looking at what his hands were doing, and walked through the bank's glass door, and not once, not a single time in 97 mornings, had he looked down at the boy doing the work. On the 98th morning, something changed, but not the way Kofi expected, and not because of anything the boy had done. Kofi Mensah Achebe was 11 years old and small for it, 1.31 meters, which his grandmother measured against the door frame of her room in Nima every 6 months with a strip of blue masking tape and the eraser end of a pencil, always saying it would shoot up like his father had, always using the word soon with a certainty that Kofi had learned not to lean on. He weighed 31 kilograms. It had a gap between his two front teeth that he had inherited from his mother's side, and a scar along the underside of his left chin from a fall off a compound wall when he was 7 that had required 4 stitches at the public clinic on Asylum Down Road, and had taken 3 weeks to heal, and had not faded in the 4 years since. He wore most mornings a red school polo shirt, the one his grandmother had bought him from the uniform supply shop near Rawlings Park for 22 cedis in September, and a pair of dark blue trousers with a patch on the right knee that his grandmother had sewn herself from the fabric of an old kaba she no longer wore. His shoes were brown, rubber-soled, and 2 sizes larger than his feet, bought from the second-hand goods market at Cantamanto for 5 cedis because his grandmother had not found his size that day and had said bigger was better because he would grow into them. It had been growing into them for 8 months and still had not reached them. It walked with a slightly heavy step because of this, a careful, deliberate placement of the foot that a person watching from a distance might have taken for seriousness. The wooden crate was not his. It had belonged to a boy named Bright, who had worked the high street corner for 3 years before his family moved to Takoradi in August. Bright had given it to Kofi 2 days before he left, along with 1 tin of black polish, 1 tin of brown polish, 1 stiff brush, 1 soft cloth cut from an old bedsheet, and a piece of advice. The bank people are the best. They tip if you don't talk. The crate had Nestle Milo stamped on one side in faded green lettering. Kofi had sanded down a rough edge on the top plank with a piece of concrete he found on the roadside, because a rough edge would snag fabric and snagged fabric would cost him a customer. He had thought of this himself at age 11, before his first morning on the corner. His grandmother's name was Maim Ama. She was 67 years old and had a bad left hip that she managed with a stick she had been using for 2 years, and a silence about how much it hurt that was louder than any complaint Kofi had ever heard from anyone. She made kenki and sold it from a basin at the edge of the Nima market 3 mornings a week. On the other mornings, she sat with the sewing and did alterations for women in the neighborhood, charging between 5 and 15 cedis depending on the work. The hip made the trips to the market slow. The sewing made the hip worse. She had not told Kofi this. He had seen it the way children see things adults decide not to say. He had started the shoeshine work in October because his school fees for the second term were due in January, and the first term had already been paid late. 11 days late. And the headmaster had called Mami Ama into his office and used a tone that Kofi had heard from the corridor and not forgotten. He woke at 5:30 every morning. He took the number 2 Trotto from Nima Junction to Kwame Nkrumah Circle, then walked 14 minutes to the High Street corner. He was at the crate by 6:45. He worked until 8:15, then ran to catch the Trotro back for school, arriving at the gate of Holy Cross Academy on Ringway Estate by 8:47, which was 3 minutes before the morning assembly ended and the gate closed. It had been 3 minutes or fewer late 11 times in 5 months. and each time he had breathed in through his nose and out through his mouth, the way his grandmother had taught him, and walked through the gate without running, because she had also taught him that a person who runs at the last minute looks like they don't believe they deserve to arrive. His grades were not suffering. This is important. His mathematics teacher, Mr. Osei, had written in his second-term report, Kofi demonstrates exceptional facility with numbers. A should be challenged further. His English teacher had written, clear and precise written expression. Reads above his level. His grandmother had read both comments twice, sitting by the window with her glasses on, and had not said anything, which was how Kofi knew she was proud. The man with the black Oxford shoes, Kofi had never learned his name, had never tried, came every morning at 7:22, always from the direction of Kinbu Road, always in a dark suit, always with a leather briefcase that he held in his right hand and a phone that he held in his left. It was perhaps 55, perhaps older, with close-cropped gray at his temples, and the build of someone who had been larger once and had recently become less so. His face was not unkind. It was simply absent. The face of a person whose attention had left the surface of things and gone somewhere internal that Kofi could not see into. The shoes were always the same pair, black cowskin Oxfords, Kofi estimated, though he had no basis for the estimated except that the leather was finer than any he worked on all morning, softer to the touch, more responsive to the brush, capable of a depth of shine that cheaper leather refused to hold. There was a small scratch on the inner left heel, half a centimeter long, that had been there since the first morning and had never gone deeper or wider. Kofi had worked around it for 97 days, the way a careful painter works around a crack in a wall, not hiding it, but not drawing attention to it either, leaving it in its own neutrality. It had never once been tipped less than 5 cedis. 3 times he had been tipped 20. He did not know what he did differently on those days. He worked the same way every time. The high street corner had 3 other regular workers, Samuel, who sold newspapers from a wire rack and was perhaps 40 and had a radio clipped to the rack that played Joy FM. All morning, Auntie Dedet, who sat on a low stool behind a folding table and sold boiled groundnuts in small paper cones, and had been at that corner for, by her own account, 22 years, and whose memory of the street and its regulars went back further than anyone else's. And a boy named Prince, who was 14 and sold phone credit and had been at the corner for 6 months, and treated Kofi with the specific condescension of someone who is only slightly older, and needs the distance more than it is warranted. Auntie Dede was the one who watched everything. She watched the way market women at fixed locations always watch, without appearing to, without turning her head, with the peripheral patience of someone who has been reading a street for 2 decades and knows which changes matter. She was the one who noticed the man first change. The morning of March 14th, Kofi was mid-brush on the left shoe. 3rd pass, the polish already seated, working now for the surface shine, when the man's phone rang. He answered it. He listened. And then he went completely still. Not the stillness of someone processing information, the stillness of someone receiving a blow that doesn't come with sound. He hung up. He did not move for several seconds. He was still looking at the phone when Kofi finished the right shoe and set the brush down and said quietly, "All done, sir." The man looked up, not at Kofi, but past him, at the middle distance of Nkrumah Avenue, at nothing. He put his hand in his pocket. He took out a note and set it on the crate without looking. He walked away from the bank, not toward it. Kofi picked up the note. It was 50 cedis. He had never received 50 cedis. He looked after the man. The man had turned left at the corner and was gone. Auntie Dedet sighed from behind her table, without looking up. He got bad news. Kofi said, "Every morning he doesn't look at me." Auntie Dede was quiet for a moment, pressing a paper cone with both thumbs. "He looked at you once," she said. "The first morning. October. You remember?" Kofi said he didn't. "You were arranging your tins," she said. "Your first day." He stopped at the crate and looked down, and you looked up, and you had your brush in your hand, and you were ready. You didn't say anything. He didn't say anything. He put his foot on the crate. She set the cone aside. He looked at you then. You just didn't see it. Kofi put the 50 cedis in his pocket and did not think about this for the rest of the day. But that night, on the trotro home, he thought about it and could not stop. If what Auntie Dedet said is already sitting in you the way I think it is, stay with me. What happens next is something neither of them saw coming, and it changes everything. The man did not come on Wednesday. He did not come on Thursday. By Friday, Kofi was counting his absence the way he had counted his presence, carefully in the back of the mind. On Friday at 7:22, the corner felt wrong in a way he could not name precisely. Prince, selling phone credit 2 meters away, said, "Your big tipper keyed on you," and laughed. Aunt Kofi did not respond, because there was no response available that was both true and worth the effort. It came back on a Monday, later than usual, 7:51. He was not in a suit. It wore a plain dark shirt, no tie, and he walked more slowly than his usual pace, as though the briefcase he still carried had become heavier over the weekend. He stopped at the crate. He put his foot on it. He looked at his phone. Kofi worked. At the end, when he said, "All done, sir," the man took his foot off the crate, but instead of reaching for his pocket immediately, he stopped. He looked down, not at the shoes, at Kofi. Kofi looked back. He did not look away, and he did not look down at his own hands, because his grandmother had told him. Specifically, on a morning when he was 8 years old and a shopkeeper on the Nima Market Road had spoken to him in a voice that assumed smallness. That a person who looks away when someone looks at them is agreeing to something they did not choose. He had remembered this for 3 years. He remembered it now. The man said, "What is your name?" Kofi told him. "How old are you?" 11, sir. "Do you go to school?" "Holy Cross Academy, sir, Ringway Estate." The man looked at him for a moment longer. Then he reached into his briefcase, not his pocket, his briefcase, and took out a white business card and held it out. Kofi took it. The man said, "Tell your parent or guardian to call that number. Tell them Mr. Darko Asante Mensah asked them to call." He put his foot on the ground. He picked up the briefcase. "How much do I owe you?" Kofi said. 5 cedis, sir." The man gave him 10. He did not look back. Kofi turned the card over in his hand. It was heavy cardstock, the kind that has a texture to it, slightly raised lettering. Darko Asante Mensah, Chief Executive, Mensah Boating Capital Group. An office address on Ambassadorial Enclave Road in Airport City. A direct telephone number. An email address. He showed it to Auntie Dede. She read it. She looked up. "You know who that is?" she said. Kofi said he did not. She set the card down on her table and looked at it for a moment. "His son died," she said. "Last year. October, a boy." She was quiet. 17 years old. Road accident, near Legon. It was a student. She looked back at Kofi. "The first morning you came, October, it was 2 weeks after the boy died. You didn't know this, but that morning, the way you were sitting there with your brush and your tins, ready." She picked up the card and handed it back to Kofi carefully. "Auntie Dede has been on this corner for 22 years. I know what a man looks like when he sees something that hurts him in a way he did not expect." She folded her hands in her lap. "Go to school," she said. "Show your grandmother the card tonight. Mam Ema, read the card 3 times." She held it under the light in the kitchen of the room they shared in Nima, standing in her housecoat with her glasses on, saying nothing. Then she sat down at the small table where they ate and folded her hands on top of the card and did not speak for long enough that Kofi started to worry that something was wrong. Then she said, "We will call tomorrow morning, before you go to the corner." She called at 7:05. A woman answered, a personal assistant, and Mammy Emma explained who she was and what the card had said. The assistant said she would pass the message to Mr. Asante Mensah and call back within the hour. She called back in 34 minutes. Mr. Asante Mensah would like to meet the boy and his guardian at his office on Thursday at 10 a.m., if they were available. Mam Ema sighed. They were available. She hung up the phone. She looked at Kofi. She said, "You have school until 12. I will speak to the headmaster." They arrived at the office tower on Ambassador Enclave Road at 9:47 on a Thursday morning. Mame Ama had pressed her best kaba, the deep blue one with the gold embroidery at the collar, the one she kept wrapped in a pillowcase in the bottom of her trunk. Kofi wore his school uniform because it was the cleanest and best-fitting thing he owned, and because his grandmother had said that a person does not dress down when they go somewhere that matters. It had polished his brown rubber-soled shoes the night before with the brown tin from his kit. The shoes were still too large, but they were shining. The receptionist at the front desk was a young woman in a cream blouse who looked at them when they entered, first at the uniform, then at the stick, then at the kaba, and picked up her phone without the pause that Kofi had learned to anticipate in places like this. She said, "Mr. Asante Mensah is expecting you." She smiled. It was a real smile. Kofi noticed the difference. The office was on the 11th floor. It looked out over the rooftops of Airport City toward the green of Achimota Forest in the distance. The desk was large, and the room was quiet, and Darko Asante Mensah stood up when they came in, stood up from behind the desk, which was not what Kofi had expected. Ant came around to greet Mami Ama with both hands and called her Mami, which was the right thing, and indicated the chairs in front of the desk and waited for her to sit before he sat. "Esaid, thank you for coming." He looked at Kofi. "I want to ask you something, and I want you to answer me honestly. Not politely, honestly. Can you do that?" Kofi sighed yes. "Every morning you shine my shoes. Do you count how many times I've come?" Kofi said, 98 times, sir, as of last Monday." The man was quiet for a moment. "And you remember the first morning?" "I don't remember you looking at me, sir. But Auntie Dede says you did." The man nodded slowly, the way a person nods when something has confirmed what they already knew but were not ready for. He opened a folder on his desk. It turned it to face Kofi. Inside was a printed page from the Holy Cross Academy website, the school's academic honor roll for the first term of the current year, published in January. Kofi's name was fourth from the top. "Esaid, how did you find that?" Kofi asked. "Your school uniform has the name of your school on the pocket." He closed the folder. "I looked you up the same morning I gave you the card." He needed to know if what I was considering was something that made sense. He looked at Mame Ama. "Mame, your grandson has something that I would like to support. If you are willing to hear what I am proposing." He proposed the following: a full scholarship to Achimota School beginning in September, managed through the Asante Mensah Foundation, a private charitable trust that Darko had established 4 years before to support the education of academically strong children from low-income households in Greater Accra. The scholarship covered tuition, boarding, books, and a monthly stipend for personal costs. It required a maintained grade average of B or above, 1 community service commitment per term, and a yearly review. There were currently 11 children on the scholarship. Kofi would be the 12th. Mame Ama listened to all of this without speaking. When he finished, she was quiet for a long time. The room was very still. Outside, far below, a horn sounded twice on the road and then was gone. She sighed. "Why my grandson?" Darko Asante Mensah looked at the folder on his desk. Then he looked up. "My son was 17 years old," he said. "He was going to read economics at Legon in September, Edied in October." His voice did not waver. He had learned, somewhere in the last 5 months, to say the sentence in the same tone as any other sentence, which was not the same as it not costing him anything. He used to get up early. He liked to be the first person awake in the house. Esaid was the only part of the day that was completely his. He looked at Kofi. "You are on that corner every morning at 6:45. That is not nothing. That is not an accident. That is a child who understands that the early part of the day belongs to the person who decides to claim it." He set both hands flat on the desk. I looked down, finally, and I saw my son's work ethic sitting in a boy I had never spoken to. I have no right to walk past that. Not twice. Nobody spoke. Mame Ama removed her glasses and held them in both hands and looked at the window, and did not move for long enough that the room seemed to hold its breath with her. Then she put her glasses back on. She said to Kofi, "You will take this." It was not a question. Kofi said, "Yes, Mom." She looked at Darko Asante Mensah. She said, "My grandson is not replacing your son. You understand this?" He said, "I do." "Good." She placed both hands on her knees and straightened in the chair. "Then we are in agreement." The papers were signed 6 days later, on a Wednesday afternoon in the same office. Kofi's last morning on the High Street corner was on a Friday in early April. He brought his tints and his brushes and his soft cloth, and he set them all on the Milo crate. All of it. and he worked his last queue of morning customers in the usual order. And when 8:10 came, he folded his cloth and closed his tins and picked up the crate and carried it to Auntie Data's table. He set it down in front of her. He said, "For you to give to someone who needs it." She looked at the crate. She looked at him. She said, "You are going?" He told her about Achimota. She listened. When he finished, she was quiet for a moment, and then she did something he had not expected. She pressed both of her palms flat against the top of the Milo crate, the way a person blesses an object before they give it away. She sighed. "Come back and tell me how you are doing. I am not going anywhere." He sighed he would. He took the trotro back to Nima at 8:20, later than usual because he had not needed to hurry toward the school gate. He sat by the window. The harmattan had gone, and the morning air off the coast had come back in. Salt and petrol, and the green smell of something alive. He watched the city go by and counted nothing. For the first time in 5 months, there was nothing to count. The next thing that needed counting would begin in September at a school he had never entered, in a dormitory he had never seen, with people he had never met. He found that he was not afraid of this. He found, sitting on the trotro at 8:24 on a Friday morning with nothing in his hands, that it felt exactly like 6:45 on a dark morning. The corner empty, the crate set, the teens in order, ready before anything had arrived. Darko Asante Mensah looked down at the boy every day for 5 months and did not see him. That is the honest accounting of what happened. Not because he was cruel, not because he was careless, because grief does something to the field of vision. It narrows it to the interior, to the place where the loss lives, and the world outside that place becomes a surface that things slide off. Buddha morning came when the field cracked open. And what was there? When it did, what had been there every single morning for 97 mornings before the crack was a child with a brush in his hand and a crate that he had sanded smooth before his first day, and an honor roll position nobody had paid for, and a work habit that belonged to someone who understood the early morning as a claim. You cannot always see what is standing in front of you. Grief will do that. Exhaustion will do that. The ordinary machinery of a full life, pulling your eyes toward your phone, your schedule, the interior conversation that never stops. All of that will do it too. This is not a condemnation. It is a description. But here's what the story is also saying. The boy kept showing up. He did not perform. He did not raise his voice or hold up a sign or find a way to make himself impossible to ignore. He showed up at 6:45 and he did the work correctly, and he waited. Not passively, actively waited. The way a person waits when they know that what they have is real and that real things eventually get seen. 98 mornings, 97 of them invisible. One of them changed everything. If there is a corner you have been standing on, if there is work you have been doing that nobody has looked at yet, a thing you have been building in the early hours before the world is watching. This story is not a promise that a man will hand you a card. It is a reminder that the crate you sanded smooth before your first customer arrived is the truest thing about you. And the truest thing about a person does not disappear because nobody has looked at it yet. It waits. It holds its shine. Here is what I want to ask you, and I want you to sit with it before you answer. If you had been in Darko's position, walking past the same person, the same work, every morning for 5 months, what would it have taken for you to finally look down? What was the thing in your own life that you almost walked past? Leave that in the comments. I read every one. Subscribe for more stories about hidden strength, quiet power, and the people the world overlooks until they change everything. I'll see you in the next one.